And in Queensland, the Prime Minister has backed down over his defiance on Queensland flood funding. The government now agreeing to chip in another $385 million in assistance. Let's bring in Queenslander and Agriculture Minister David Littleproud, who joins me from Townsville. Thanks very much for your time, Minister. So this back down,
thanks for having me.
The Prime Minister made a decision based on principle and what should happen, and then what, he's just changed his mind based on the election?
Well, this normally isn't the federal government's remit. Planning sits with the state and local governments, and the federal government is going above and beyond, and the Prime Minister's made it clear that while the Queensland government and the federal opposition want to play politics with disaster funding, we'll be honest and consistent with it, but this is obviously above and beyond, and the state government in Queensland made this application, and normally these applications aren't made public until such time as there's negotiations between both state and federal governments. But instead, the Queensland Labor government thought that they could use a political wedge when they knew very well this was well outside the remit of the federal government's normal funding arrangements. But that doesn't stop the Labor Party from playing politics on the misery of thousands of Australians.
But of course they'll do it again because it worked, and you just said this is normally outside the remit. So you've set a new standard now for when the federal government pays for these sorts of things.
Well, and that's likely to be the case now. Once you start a precedent, you need to follow through it, and so too will the next federal government after the next election, whether it be us or the other mob. So we're being honest about that. That's why we were trying to make it clear to the Queensland government that really this is your job to do the heavy lifting. And much of the challenges we've got with some of these houses that have been inundated is because of the poor planning at local and state government level. And state government, who has ownership of local government, has been missing in terms of making sure that proper planning decisions have been made. And now the federal government is having to kick the tin to cover up the mistakes of state governments.
So, OK, so hang on. Did this decision go through Cabinet at all?
It goes through an ERC process, which is a committee of Cabinet. So it's gone through all the due processes. And in fact, even with disaster funding, there is actually no need for that to be undertaken in many cases because it sits under an emergency fund in which the funds can be drawn on through emergency. But as you said,
this now sets a precedent for the federal government to chip in for this type of funding. That could be, we're going to have a lot of natural disasters, billions of dollars a year, and that decision now it's been made on the eve of an election is suddenly just locked in federal government funding and spending.
Well, it's not locked it in, Tom. It'll come down to what the next federal government wants to do. But obviously, for an investment of this scale, it does set a precedent, could set a precedent, and it'll depend where those conversations can have and whether there's a maturity of conversation that can be had with state governments in particular who have created this mess and asking the federal government to cover up their cracks of their misactions in terms of appropriate planning for many of these people and letting them build houses on places that are not appropriate. And obviously the federal government is there to support every Australian, but we're just saying to the states, this is normally sit within your remit because you've held responsibility over the Planning Act. You're the ones that should have fixed this. And unfortunately, Queensland always plays poor, blames Canberra and asks for more money. And, you know, we don't want to play the politics of people's misery. And that's the extent at which the Labor Party has stooped. To play on the misery of people's misfortune, devastation. So why do we get into it, Tom? Because this should be above politics. This should be about looking after your fellow Australians. And if one level of government won't live up to it, then you know what? The federal government's going to have to step in and look after our fellow Australian. And if state governments don't want to look after their citizens to the extent they should, well, that's more a reflection on them than it is on us.
But your government has caved in on this because we're about to go to an election. That's pretty obvious.
No, because of the misery that thousands of Australians are going through, and the state government, who wanted to come up with a plan to fix their planning failures, were unable and unwilling to do it themselves. So why would we let? Why would they? No, but
we had lobbying
Tom,
from
if you want to play high moral ground here, Tom. If you want to play high moral ground, we are taking this out of the political sphere. What we are saying is we shouldn't be politicising this. We should be actually fixing this for Australians. And if the Queensland government doesn't want to do that, then why should those people that have just had their houses with water through it be the victims of the political wedge that the state Labor government want to undertake? We need to be above that, and that's what the Prime Minister has done. He has been above that. He's been above the petty politics of the Queensland Labor Party, who's trying to help Anthony Albanese, who's who's been in hiding for 3 years, to get across the line without anyone seeing him. And Anastasia Palaszczuk is doing all the work for him, but she's using this horrible thing called politics with the misery of thousands of Queenslanders who've just had their houses destroyed. I mean, I think Australian politics should be above that, and unfortunately, the moral compass of the Queensland Government goes missing every day.
Would you say the same thing about Julian Ryan then and Trevor Evans, who lobbied for the federal government to chip in?
Yes, I would say that what they have done has gone and heard the misery of their constituents and saw that the politicisation by the Queensland Government was not going to change. They were simply trying to create a political wedge rather than fix a problem that they created. And so what does a local federal member do? They stand up for their people. And if there's an impasse where you have a tier of government who has failed their citizens and does not want to own up to their failures and does not want to fix the problem, then it would be on every federal member to come forward and to ask for help. And that's what those two members of Parliament did. They rose above the politics of the Queensland Labor Party.
Well, hang on,
and came to the Prime Minister and said, "This is
also partly worried about their seats." Let's be frank about that. That they were worried about their seats.
Well, Tom, I think that's a shallow. That's a shallow statement, Tom. That's a shallow statement. As a federal member, you feel the misery and the pain of people who have gone through natural disasters. I used to be.
You can do both. You can both absolutely have that sympathy and feel the misery, and also want to.
Yeah, I think that's cynical, Tom. I think that's cynical, Tom. This is about people's lives and livelihoods that have been torn up in a matter of 24, 48 hours. And I think, we need to give us some credit. We are human beings. We are human beings, and we do feel that pain. You only have to meet people and you see in their eyes the pain and anguish that they've gone through.
I totally understand.
It's a normal human reaction to try and fix it. And that's what Julian has done, and that's what Trevor's done.
You'd want to help everyone, but I'm just saying we can't divorce the reality from trying to win a seat. Let me ask you this within your area. Labor says it wants to end reliance on short-term visa holders to fill skill shortages in Australia, in part by making it easier for foreign workers to get permanent residency. Do you agree with this principle?
Yeah, I've actually enacted it. It's called the Ag visa. But Anthony Albanese won't sign up to it.
It's not happening yet.
And in one of the most... sorry, Tom, that's wrong. And that's disrespectful not only to us as a government, but also the Vietnamese government. And this is exactly... You've taken Anthony Albanese's line there, Tom. That's a political statement rather than reality. The Ag visa came into effect on the 1st of October. And we signed up with the sovereign government, the Vietnamese government. That means that they are in agreement to send their people under this Ag visa. The MOU is the actual implementation of this visa. But Tom, if you'll let me answer, you'll get an answer here, mate. So it's important you understand that is the implementation. A foreign state has signed up to this, a sovereign foreign state, one of our closest strategic partners, and to be disrespected by Anthony Albanese and say it doesn't exist is actually disgraceful and shows that he doesn't have the ability to handle foreign relations. I mean, this is abhorrent to say to a foreign country that has an agreement with us now to send their people to Australia, to say that it doesn't exist is disrespectful. That's a sovereign country that signed up to it. Now, what happens now?
Quick one on that. The timeline is not running when it was supposed to. You've conceded that. This hasn't happened as quickly as you wanted, but also asked about skilled
because
workers.
of the AWU, Tom. Let's not sugarcoat over the reason why. It was the AWU that went and visited every embassy and High Commission and told them not to send their citizens. I mean, what organisation does that to their fellow Australians and say, don't send your citizens because Australian farmers are going to exploit your workers? I mean, there is a small cohort that does the wrong thing, but to generalise and demonise Australian farmers the way that the AWU has done it, and then for the Labor Party to go quiet and to take the bidding of the AWU just is a short window into what's going to happen if Anthony Albanese gets into government. The unions are running this show. That's what's going to happen, and you're going to pay at the checkout because farmers are making investment decisions now not to plant. If they don't plant, up goes your prices. And I can tell you they're already going up. ABARES was estimating over 20% increase. So fuel will just be minuscule compared to the fact that you won't have supply because Anthony Albanese won't say yes or no. It's as simple as that. He has to look people in the eye and just say yes or no.
We're seemingly going to get a firmer policy from Labor on the table. We'll talk with you about that, I'm sure, during the election. But we're out of time. Minister, thanks for your time today.
Thanks for having me, mate.